Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing chapters in American medical history, buried deep in the hollows of eastern Kentucky. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will move you in a way few other accounts can, challenging everything you thought you knew about the sanctity of medicine and the darkness that can flourish when power goes unchecked in forgotten places. We're about to delve into a mystery that claimed dozens of lives over nearly 2 decades, where a respected physician defied all ethical boundaries and left a legacy so horrifying that the medical establishment tried to erase every trace of his existence, where vulnerable souls, seeking healing, instead became subjects in experiments that belonged in nightmares rather than hospitals. It was the year 1938. Europe teetered on the brink of war. In Germany, the horrors of Nazi medical experimentation were just beginning, though the world would not learn the full scope for years. In the United States, the Great Depression still gripped the nation, leaving millions desperate, destitute, and willing to accept any promise of help. In the remote mountains of Harlan County, Kentucky, the situation was even more desperate. There, between mist-covered peaks and deep valleys where the sun barely penetrated for months at a time, communities lived virtually isolated from the rest of the world, connected only by dirt trails that became impassable rivers of mud during the endless months of rain. Coal mining was the only industry, and it was killing men by the hundreds. Black lung cave-ins, explosions that lit the night sky with terrible beauty. The miners who survived emerged each evening coated in darkness, coughing blood into stained handkerchiefs, their bodies breaking down piece by piece. It was into this world of suffering that Dr. Elias Hartwell arrived in the autumn of 1937, driving a black Ford sedan up a road that seemed to climb toward the clouds themselves. The mountains of eastern Kentucky possess a quality that unsettles outsiders, a sense of timelessness, of being somehow removed from the normal flow of history. Fog clings to the hollows like something living, reluctant to release its grip even under the assault of noon sun. The forests are dense with oak and hickory, their canopies so thick that the forest floor exists in perpetual twilight. Streams run cold and clear over ancient stone, their waters tasting of minerals and secrets held for millennia in the earth's dark heart. Harlan County in 1937 was a place of contradictions. Rich in coal, it was home to some of the poorest people in America. The mining companies built towns, if they could be called that, consisting of identical wooden houses painted company colors, each one exactly the same as its neighbor, arranged in precise rows that spoke of efficiency rather than humanity. The company store stood at the center of each camp, a monument to economic bondage where miners spent their scrip on overpriced goods, forever in debt, forever bound to the darkness underground. The people here were descendants of Scottish and Irish immigrants who had pushed into these mountains generations earlier, seeking isolation and independence. They brought with them old songs, old superstitions, old ways of healing that mixed Christianity with something far more ancient. When modern medicine failed, and it often did, they turned to root doctors and herb women, to poultices made from plants whose names were known only in whispers, to rituals performed under specific phases of the moon. Into this world came Dr. Elias Hartwell. He was 43 years old, tall and thin, with wire-rimmed spectacles that caught the light in unsettling ways. His credentials were impeccable, or so they seemed. He had trained at respected institutions, published papers on tuberculosis treatment, and corresponded with physicians across the country. Most importantly, he came with money, enough money to build a hospital. The people of Harlan County had never had a real hospital before. There was a company doctor who set broken bones and dispensed aspirin, who occasionally performed emergency surgery on kitchen tables under the dim light of kerosene lamps. But a real hospital, with proper beds and equipment and staff, this was something beyond imagination, a gift from heaven itself. Dr. Hartwell chose his location carefully. 7 miles outside the town of Cumberland, at the end of a winding road that climbed steadily upward, there stood an old lumber mill that had closed during the Depression. The building was massive, 3 stories of brick and timber, with large windows that had once allowed light to flood the work floor. It sat on a plateau surrounded by dense forest, with a stream running nearby and a view that stretched for miles down the valley. Within 6 months, Dr. Hartwell had transformed the abandoned mill into Cumberland Mountain Hospital. The windows now had bars, for security, he explained, given the isolation of the location. The upper floors were converted into patient wards, with rows of iron beds painted white, each one equipped with leather restraints necessary for patients experiencing delirium or convulsions. He assured the county officials who came to inspect. The ground floor housed his offices, examination rooms, and a surgical theater that gleamed with modern equipment. The basement, he said, was for storage. The hospital opened its doors in the spring of 1938. The first patients were coal miners suffering from silicosis and black lung, men who could no longer work, who spent their days gasping for breath while their families watched helplessly. Dr. Hartwell accepted them all, charging fees so modest that even the poorest families could afford treatment. He traveled to mining camps personally, examining patients in their homes, offering hope where none had existed before. "I can help you," he told them, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "The treatments are new, experimental, but I've seen remarkable results. Your breathing will improve. Your pain will decrease. You'll be able to work again, to provide for your families." They believed him. What choice did they have? The first patient admitted for long-term care was a man named Thomas Hensley, 41 years old, a miner for 23 years. His lungs were so compromised he could barely walk from his bed to the door. His wife, Martha, wept with gratitude when Dr. Hartwell agreed to take him. "I'll take care of him," the doctor promised. "You can visit every Sunday afternoon. I'm confident we'll see improvement within weeks." Thomas Hensley entered Cumberland Mountain Hospital on April 15, 1938. He was never seen alive again outside its walls. For the first year, everything seemed miraculous. Patients disappeared into the hospital, and, according to Dr. Hartwell, improved dramatically. He showed charts to visiting family members, graphs demonstrating increased lung capacity, decreased inflammation. But the patients themselves remained in isolation, too fragile for visits. He explained, their immune systems compromised by the treatments. Letters arrived from some patients, written in shaky handwriting, describing their progress, expressing gratitude. The families believed. They wanted to believe. But in the close-knit communities of Harlan County, whispers have a way of traveling. They move from porch to porch during evening visiting hours, from woman to woman at the company store, from miner to miner in the darkness underground where secrets feel safer to share. The first whisper came from a young nurse named Sarah Blackwell, who had been hired by Dr. Hartwell to assist with patient care. She appeared at her family's home one evening in October of 1938, 3 months after beginning work at the hospital. Her hands shook as she drank the coffee her mother poured. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. "Something's wrong up there," she told her father, Jacob Blackwell, a former mine foreman who commanded respect in the community. I can't explain it properly, but the patients on the 3rd floor, the long-term ones, they're not getting better. They're getting worse, and the sounds at night." She stopped, pressing her hands to her face. "What sounds?" her father asked gently. "Screaming," she whispered. Screaming, and then silence. And Dr. Hartwell, he just continues his work as if nothing is happening. He's changed his eyes, the way he talks about the patients now, like they're not people anymore, like they're specimens. Jacob Blackwell reported his daughter's concerns to the county sheriff, a man named Raymond Cooper, who had held the position for 12 years through some of the county's most violent labor disputes. Sheriff Cooper was not easily alarmed, but something in Blackwell's demeanor troubled him. "I'll look into it," he promised. Quietly, 2 days later, Sarah Blackwell was found dead at the bottom of the hospital's main staircase. Dr. Hartwell reported that she had suffered a tragic fall, losing her balance while carrying a tray of medical instruments. The coroner, a man who received generous payments from Dr. Hartwell for his cooperation, ruled it accidental death. But Sarah's father knew his daughter. She had grown up in these mountains, sure-footed as a deer. She did not simply fall downstairs. Sheriff Cooper began asking questions. He visited families who had patients at Cumberland Mountain Hospital, requesting permission to interview their loved ones. Dr. Hartwell was cordial, cooperative, and obstructive. The patients were too ill for interviews, he explained. Their conditions required complete rest. Any disturbance could trigger setbacks, perhaps in a few months, when they had stabilized. The months passed. The requests were denied again and again. In the spring of 1939, a patient did leave the hospital not through release, but through escape. His name was Calvin Morrison, a miner who had been admitted with severe respiratory illness. One night in March, he somehow made it past the locked doors, past the barred windows, and stumbled down the mountain road in his hospital gown, barefoot in the freezing rain. He was found the next morning by a coal truck driver, collapsed on the roadside, hypothermic and delirious. They brought him to the company doctor in Cumberland, who immediately saw that whatever was wrong with Calvin Morrison had nothing to do with black lung. His body was covered in wounds, not injuries, but surgical incisions, dozens of them, in various stages of healing. His arms bore track marks from repeated injections. Most disturbing were the marks on his skull. Small burr holes had been drilled into the bone, then sealed. The doctor had been performing some kind of cranial procedure. Calvin Morrison regained consciousness for only brief periods, but what he said in those moments was enough to freeze the blood of everyone who heard it. "The basement," he gasped, gripping the company doctor's wrist with surprising strength. "Don't let anyone else go to the basement. He takes us down there. He opens us up while we're still awake. He wants to see how much pain we can endure before we break. He's keeping records, charts. He thinks he's making discoveries." "Who?" the doctor asked. "Dr. Hartwell. He's not trying to cure us," Calvin Morrison whispered, his eyes wide with horror. "He never was. We're experiments, all of us. We're just experiments." Calvin Morrison died 3 hours later. The official cause of death was respiratory failure complicated by exposure. But the company doctor, a man named William Fletcher, had been practicing medicine for 31 years, and he knew murder when he saw it, even when it hid behind medical terminology. Dr. Fletcher went directly to Sheriff Cooper with his findings. Together, they examined Morrison's body, documenting every wound, every injection site, every surgical incision. They photographed the skull wounds, they took detailed notes, and then, without informing Dr. Hartwell of their intentions, they requested a warrant to search Cumberland Mountain Hospital. The county judge, Judge Marcus Hayward, reviewed their evidence. He was an old man, approaching 70, who had presided over Harlan County courts for decades. He had seen men killed in labor wars, children starved during strikes, violence that seemed to have no end. But this was something different. This was calculated, cold, methodical evil dressed in the respectability of medicine. "Get your warrant," Judge Hayward said, and Sheriff Cooper, "take armed deputies. I don't trust that man not to resist." The raid on Cumberland Mountain Hospital took place on April 7, 1939, at 11 o'clock in the morning. Sheriff Cooper brought 6 deputies, all armed, along with Dr. Fletcher and a nurse from the county to care for any patients they might find. They drove up the winding mountain road in 3 vehicles, prepared for resistance. They found none. Dr. Hartwell met them at the entrance, perfectly calm, perfectly composed. He wore his white coat and his wire-rimmed spectacles. He smiled. "Gentlemen," he said, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Sheriff Cooper presented the warrant. Dr. Hartwell read it carefully, then nodded. Of course, you're welcome to examine the facility. I have nothing to hide. My work here is in full compliance with medical standards, I assure you. These accusations are unfortunate misunderstandings, likely arising from the traumatic mental state of poor Mr. Morrison before his tragic death." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that." Open the doors. The first and second floors appeared normal, even exemplary. Patient rooms were clean, well organized. Medical equipment was modern and properly maintained. The current patients, about 15 in total, seemed adequately cared for, though several appeared heavily sedated. "We administer sedatives for patient comfort," Dr. Hartwell explained, walking beside Sheriff Cooper like a tour guide in a museum. "Many suffer from anxiety related to their respiratory conditions. It's standard practice. But when they reached the 3rd floor, the atmosphere changed. The windows were not just barred, they were painted black from the inside, blocking all natural light. The doors to individual rooms were reinforced with additional locks, and the smell, a mixture of antiseptic, human waste, and something else, something organic and wrong, was overwhelming. "This area houses our most critical patients," Dr. Hartwell said, his voice remaining steady. "They require isolation and specialized care." "Open these doors," Sheriff Cooper commanded. Dr. Hartwell hesitated for the first time, his composure cracking just slightly. "Sheriff, I must protest. These patients are extremely fragile. Any disturbance, open them now." The first room contained a man who had once been named Robert Hayes, though he could no longer remember his name or anything else about his former life. He was strapped to his bed, his head partially shaved, with visible scars crisscrossing his scalp. When the door opened and light flooded in, he began screaming not words, just sounds of pure animal terror. The second room held a woman, Diane Mitchell, who had been admitted with tuberculosis 14 months earlier. Her medical chart, still hanging on the wall, showed a progression of treatments that made Dr. Fletcher's hands shake as he read. Experimental injections of various compounds, surgical removal of portions of lung tissue while the patient was conscious to observe response to pain, exposure, to controlled infections to test immune system response, cranial procedures to observe effects of lobotomy on respiratory function. It went on and on and on. The 3rd floor of Cumberland Mountain Hospital contained 23 patients in various states of physical and mental deterioration. Every single one showed evidence of surgical experimentation. Every single one had been subjected to procedures that had no legitimate medical purpose. Dr. Hartwell had been using them to satisfy his curiosity about human pain tolerance, about the body's capacity to survive trauma, about the effects of various surgical procedures on consciousness and cognition. He kept meticulous notes, detailed charts, even photographs of his work. He had been conducting his own personal program of human experimentation, using people who had trusted him, who had come to him for healing. "These are groundbreaking studies," Dr. Hartwell said, his voice now taking on a defensive, almost petulant tone. "You don't understand. The advancement of medical science requires sacrifice. These people were dying anyway. I've learned things that will benefit humanity for generations. Their suffering has meaning. I've given their deaths meaning." Sheriff Cooper turned to face him slowly. The sheriff was not a violent man by nature, but in that moment, with the sounds of tortured patients echoing around them, he wanted nothing more than to kill the doctor where he stood. "You're under arrest," he said quietly, "for murder, for assault, for every crime I can think of, and probably several I haven't thought of yet." But the basement, they hadn't yet searched the basement. Dr. Fletcher insisted they go down before removing the patients. "We need to know the full extent of this," he said. "We need to document everything." The basement stairs descended into darkness. The electric lights that illuminated the rest of the hospital did not extend below ground. Sheriff Cooper lit a kerosene lantern, and they descended. The sheriff, Dr. Fletcher, 2 deputies, and Dr. Hartwell in handcuffs, his earlier composure now completely shattered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the basement's chill. The first thing they saw was the table. It was a surgical table, stainless steel, equipped with leather restraints at multiple points: wrists, ankles, chest, forehead, thighs. The leather was stained dark with old blood. Around the table were positioned several bright surgical lamps, currently unlit. Beside it stood a cart covered with instruments: scalpels, bone saws, drills, clamps, needles, and devices whose purposes were unclear, but whose presence suggested nothing good. The walls were lined with shelves holding glass jars. The jars contained specimens, organs, tissue samples, even what appeared to be entire sections of human brain, all carefully labeled with dates and patient names. There were dozens of jars, perhaps hundreds. In the corner stood a filing cabinet. Inside were Dr. Hartwell's complete records of his experiments, organized with bureaucratic precision. Each patient had a file containing before and after photographs, detailed procedure notes, observations about their responses to various stimuli, and final autopsy reports. 27 patients had died under his care over the 18 months since the hospital opened. 27 human beings had been tortured to death in the name of medical research that had no legitimate purpose, that would benefit no one, that existed only to satisfy one man's curiosity and desire for recognition. Dr. Fletcher read through several files, his face growing more ashen with each page. Finally, he looked up at Sheriff Cooper. He was trying to publish this, he said, his voice hollow. He has drafts of papers he intended to submit to medical journals. He actually thought the medical community would celebrate his work. Dr. Hartwell, still in handcuffs, actually tried to nod enthusiastically. "They will, once they understand the significance of my findings, once they see the data, they'll recognize that I've advanced our understanding of human physiology by decades. The pain was necessary. The deaths were regrettable but necessary. You can't make progress without sacrifice. The only sacrifice here is going to be yours." Sheriff Cooper said, "Take him out of here before I forget I'm an officer of the law." The trial of Dr. Elias Hartwell began in the Harlan County Courthouse on June 1, 1939. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the patients themselves, those who could still testify, the photographs from the basement, the detailed records of torture disguised as medical treatment, the testimony of Dr. Fletcher regarding the complete absence of legitimate medical justification for any of the procedures performed. The defense attempted to argue that Dr. Hartwell was insane, that his actions were the result of mental illness rather than criminal intent. But the prosecution pointed to the meticulous record keeping, the deliberate deception of families, the systematic nature of his actions over 18 months. This was not madness. This was calculated evil. The most powerful testimony came from Margaret Hensley, widow of Thomas Hensley, the first patient admitted to Cumberland Mountain Hospital. She took the stand wearing a black dress, her hands folded in her lap, her voice steady despite the tears that streamed down her face. "He told me my husband would get better," she said. "He told me Thomas would come home, that he'd be able to work again, to play with our grandchildren. He looked me in the eye every Sunday when I came to visit, and he told me Thomas was improving. I believed him, I trusted him, I brought him pies I'd baked, coffee from our garden. I thanked him for his kindness." She paused, gathering herself. "My husband died in that basement. He died in pain, alone, calling for me. The records say he was conscious when Dr. Hartwell removed his lung tissue. Conscious. He felt everything, and that man." She pointed at Dr. Hartwell with a trembling finger. "That man wrote down how long it took him to stop screaming." The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Judge Hayward sentenced Dr. Elias Hartwell to death by hanging. The sentence was carried out on August 13, 1939, in the courtyard of the Harlan County Jail. A crowd of nearly 300 people attended, including family members of the victims, survivors from the hospital, and citizens who simply wanted to witness justice for the horrors committed in their community. Dr. Hartwell maintained his composure until the very end. He refused a final meal. He refused to speak to a priest. When offered a chance to make a final statement, he declined, then seemed to change his mind. "History will vindicate me," he said, standing on the gallows platform. 50 years from now, 100 years from now, the medical community will look at my work and recognize its value. You're executing a pioneer, a man ahead of his time. The trapdoor opened. Dr. Elias Hartwell died at 11:42 in the morning, witnessed by the community he had violated so profoundly. But death was not the end of the horror. The question remained, what to do with Cumberland Mountain Hospital itself? The building stood empty, too contaminated by what had occurred within its walls for any legitimate use. The county lacked funds to demolish it. Local people refused to go near it. It stood on the mountain like a monument to suffering, its barred windows staring down at the valley. In the autumn of 1939, a fire broke out in the building. The official investigation called it arson, though no perpetrator was ever identified. The fire burned for 3 days, fed by the wooden floors and old timber. When it finally died, only the brick shell remained, blackened and skeletal against the mountain sky. Most assumed that was the end of the story, but stories like this don't end, they echo. The survivors of Cumberland Mountain Hospital, those 23 patients rescued from the 3rd floor, faced long, difficult recoveries. Some regained physical health, but never fully recovered mentally from their ordeal. Several took their own lives in the years that followed. Others simply faded, their minds having retreated to places where the memories couldn't reach them. The medical establishment reacted with swift denial. Dr. Hartwell's credentials were examined and found to be partially fabricated. His publications were retracted. Medical journals that had corresponded with him destroyed their letters. Within a year, it was as if he had never existed in the professional medical world. No one wanted to be associated with the horrors of Cumberland Mountain Hospital. But locally, the memory persisted. Parents warned their children away from the ruins. People driving past at night reported seeing lights in the burn, doubt windows, hearing sounds that might have been wind or might have been something else. The forest slowly reclaimed the building, vines growing over blackened brick, trees pushing up through what had been the basement floor. Today, more than 80 years later, the ruins of Cumberland Mountain Hospital still stand, though they're difficult to find. The road that once led to the hospital has been reclaimed by nature. No signs mark the location. Local historical societies make no mention of it in their records. The county prefers to pretend it never existed, but the people of Harlan County remember. The descendants of the victims remember. They remember because forgetting would be a final insult to those who suffered there, an erasure of their pain as complete as Dr. Hartwell's attempt to reduce them to experimental subjects. The story of Cumberland Mountain Hospital raises questions that remain uncomfortable even today. How could one man commit such atrocities for so long without being stopped? The answer lies in the intersection of isolation, desperation, and trust. The people who sent their loved ones to Dr. Hartwell were poor, uneducated in medical matters, and desperate for help. He presented himself as their savior, and they wanted so badly to believe. It also reveals the danger of allowing medicine to operate without oversight, without accountability, without the ethical frameworks that we take for granted today. The experiments conducted at Cumberland Mountain Hospital preceded by years the more famous Tuskegee syphilis study, the radiation experiments on unwitting subjects, and other dark chapters in American medical history. Dr. Hartwell was not an aberration. He was an early example of a problem that would take decades to fully address. The story serves as a reminder that evil often wears a respectable face, that it speaks in educated tones, that it hides behind credentials and professional authority. It reminds us that the most vulnerable members of society, the poor, the sick, the isolated, are the ones most at risk when that evil goes unchecked. And it reminds us that some places remember. The ruins on that mountain remember. The forest that grows around them remembers. The wind that moves through the hollow windows remembers. On certain nights, when the fog rolls thick through the valleys of Harlan County, when the moon is hidden and the darkness feels absolute, people driving the back roads sometimes glimpse something in the distance, a light burning on a mountain that should be empty, in a building that should be dead. They don't stop to investigate. They drive faster, their hands tight on the wheel, their eyes fixed on the road ahead. Because some places should stay lost. Some stories should remain in the past, examined for their lessons, but not revisited, not revived. Cumberland Mountain Hospital is one of those places. The victims deserve to be remembered not as Dr. Hartwell saw them, as subjects and specimens, but as human beings who trusted and were betrayed, who suffered and died in pursuit of help that never came. Thomas Hensley, Robert Hayes, Diane Mitchell, Calvin Morrison, who gave his life to expose the truth. Sarah Blackwell, whose suspicions cost her everything. Their names, and the names of the others, deserve to be spoken. Their story deserves to be told, because forgetting would be the final cruelty. If this journey through one of history's darkest medical crimes has resonated with you, if you find yourself pondering the nature of evil and the responsibility we bear to protect the vulnerable, then consider subscribing to The Untold Hour. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried in time that deserve to be examined. Leave a like if this account provoked reflections that go beyond mere entertainment, and comment sharing your own perspectives on medical ethics and the lessons we must never forget. Tell us, what safeguards do you think are most important to prevent such atrocities from happening again? Your voice matters in ensuring we learn from history rather than repeat it. Until next time, remember that the past is never truly past. It whispers to us still, demanding that we listen, that we learn, that we never forget. This has been the Untold Hour.